A sex worker lured her clients out of crowded bars and into her apartment. There, with her boyfriend, she robbed them, killed them, and cut their bodies to erase the trail. I'm Santa, and tonight I'll walk you step by step through the case of a killer couple who turned nightlife into a hunting ground, until one mistake cracked their mask and brought the whole story down. The first time it happened, it was a blur of adrenaline and a shocking realization. Sarah, the sex worker, had brought a man back to her small apartment, just as she'd planned with Mark, her boyfriend. The sedative slipped into his drink worked quickly. The robbery was swift, almost anticlimactic. Then came the kill. The weight of it, the finality, settled heavily in a small space. For a moment, a flicker of panic crossed Sarah's face, but Mark was calm, focused. He started the dismemberment in the bathtub, a cold, clinical process designed to eliminate any trace. The disposal, in separate, anonymous locations on the city's outskirts, felt surreal, like a dark dream. Back in the meticulously cleaned apartment, a strange mix of fear and a perverse sense of accomplishment settled over them. They had gotten away with it. The silence in the days that followed was heavy, punctuated by their hushed conversations, replaying every detail, every risk. But as the days stretched into weeks and no alarm was raised, a dangerous seed began to sprout: confidence. The fear receded, replaced by a chillingly pragmatic approach. They refined their method, their movements becoming more practiced, more efficient. Sarah became adept at identifying vulnerable targets, men who were alone, perhaps a little too trusting, and unlikely to be missed immediately. Mark's role was the grim anchor of their operation, the methodical executioner and dismemberer. The second time was easier. The initial shock had dulled, replaced by a grim familiarity. The thrill of the risk remained, intertwined with the satisfaction of the financial gain. They were becoming a well-oiled, horrifying machine. The third and fourth times followed the same pattern, the routine solidifying. Lure, drug, rob, kill, dismember, dispose. Each successful execution reinforced their belief in their invincibility. They felt like they had found a perfect system, a way to exploit the anonymity of city life, the transient nature of Sarah's work. They talked about a future built on their ill-gotten gains, a life far removed from their current precarious existence. But with each repetition, subtle threads began to weave a pattern, unnoticed by the perpetrators, but potentially visible to watchful eyes. All the victims had frequented similar bars. None had left any digital footprint after their disappearances. There were no signs of struggle at their last known locations. Each was a man who might have sought out the company of a sex worker. Individually, these were just missing persons, sad but not necessarily suspicious. Collectively, however, they started to form an unsettling picture in the dusty files of the local police department. Detective Inspector Davies, a man known for his intuitive grasp of criminal patterns, felt a prickle of unease as he reviewed the growing list of missing men. There were no bodies, no witnesses, no clear connections between the victims, yet the circumstances felt eerily similar. He assigned a small, dedicated team to delve deeper, to look beyond the surface of isolated disappearances. They started by meticulously mapping the last known locations of each man, noting the overlap in their frequented nightlife spots. Undercover officers began to frequent these bars, observing, listening. Weeks turned into frustrating months. The investigation yielded mostly dead ends. Witnesses remembered seeing the missing men, often leaving with an unknown woman, but descriptions were vague. Surveillance footage was unhelpful, the crucial encounters happening outside camera range. Yet, Davies persisted, driven by the gut feeling that something sinister was at play. He knew that killers often fall into patterns, that repetition, while breeding confidence for them, also creates vulnerabilities for investigators. Meanwhile, Sarah and Mark continued their grim enterprise. The fifth time, a sense of almost bored routine had set in. They were so confident in their method that they had become slightly careless. During the dismemberment, a few small bone fragments were inadvertently swept under a rug. The apartment cleaning, though usually meticulous, might have missed these tiny, crucial pieces of evidence. Their biggest mistake, however, was their reliance on a rented storage unit to temporarily hold the remains before final disposal. They had chosen a unit in a less frequented part of the city, believing it offered anonymity. But decomposition is a relentless process. Over time, one of the older suitcases, containing the remains of their first victim, began to leak. The seal had failed, and a dark, putrid fluid seeped out, carrying with it an unmistakable, horrifying odor. The manager of the storage facility, a middle-aged man named Mr. Henderson, initially tried to ignore the growing stench emanating from Unit 31B. He assumed a tenant had stored something perishable, but the smell intensified, becoming so foul that other renters began to complain. Finally, his professional responsibility overriding his reluctance, he approached the unit. The sight of a dark, viscous liquid oozing from under the door sent a chill down his spine. He didn't hesitate. He called the police. Detective Inspector Davies was notified immediately. He arrived at the storage facility with a team of forensic specialists. The air around Unit 31B was thick with the unmistakable smell of decaying flesh. The leaking suitcase was carefully opened. The contents confirmed their darkest suspicions: human remains. A thorough search of the unit revealed several other suitcases and bags, each containing dismembered body parts. The sterile environment of the storage unit had become a macabre archive of their crimes. The discovery sent a shockwave through the police department. This was no longer a series of simple missing persons cases. This was the work of a serial killer or killers. The forensic team worked tirelessly, cataloging and collecting the remains. Initial estimates suggested at least 5 different individuals. The precise, almost surgical way the bodies had been dismembered indicated a calculated effort to prevent identification. The rental agreement for Unit 31B provided the crucial break. The unit was leased to a Sarah Miller, with a Mark Jenkins listed as an alternative contact. Investigators immediately ran their names through police databases. Sarah Miller's occupation as a sex worker and Mark Jenkins's record of minor offenses painted a grim picture. Photographs of the pair were circulated among the undercover officers who had been working the nightlife beat. Within hours, 2 officers recognized Sarah as the woman they had seen leaving various bars with several of the missing men. With their identities confirmed and the horrifying evidence from the storage unit, the police prepared for the arrest. Sarah and Mark's modest apartment became the focus of intense surveillance. Detectives watched their every move, waiting for the opportune moment. They didn't have to wait long. Within 48 hours of the discovery at the storage unit, both Sarah and Mark were apprehended as they left their apartment. They offered no resistance, their faces betraying a mixture of shock and a dawning realization that their carefully constructed world had collapsed. The interrogations began. Initially, both suspects maintained their innocence, denying any knowledge of the missing men or the contents of the storage unit. But the evidence was overwhelming. The forensic team had already begun the painstaking process of identifying the remains through DNA analysis, and the matches started coming in quickly, linking them to the missing persons. Confronted with this irrefutable scientific evidence, Mark was the first to crack. He confessed in detail to their gruesome operation, outlining Sarah's role in luring the victims and his own in the subsequent robbery, murder, dismemberment, and disposal. Sarah's confession followed shortly after, a chillingly matter-of-fact account of their 5 kills. The trial of Sarah Miller and Mark Jenkins was a media sensation. The courtroom was packed every day as the prosecution laid out the horrifying details of their crimes. The forensic evidence was presented in graphic detail, the DNA matches irrefutably linking the recovered remains to the 5 missing men. Bartenders and acquaintances testified about seeing the victims leave with Sarah. The timeline of each disappearance was meticulously reconstructed, painting a damning picture of the couple's systematic and brutal methodology. The defense attorneys offered weak arguments, attempting to portray Sarah as being coerced by Mark, but the evidence of her active participation in the luring and planning was too strong. Mark's confession sealed their fate. The jury deliberated for 8 hours before returning a unanimous verdict: guilty on all counts of murder. The sentencing hearing was a somber affair. The judge delivered a scathing condemnation of their inhuman and depraved acts, handing down the maximum sentence, life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The courtroom was silent as Sarah and Mark were led away, their reign of terror finally, irrevocably over. The city's nightlife, once their hunting ground, could finally breathe a collective sigh of relief. The shadows had been lifted, thanks to a leaking suitcase and the relentless work of a dedicated detective and his team. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and leave a comment below, because more chilling true stories are coming, and trust me, you won't want to miss the next one.